So I have seen some people, whether they be fans or, media people that don't really like, the fact that Cousins was only throwing for 10 passes against Atlanta. And I do think most of that does have to probably do with just his paycheck of sorts. And I think 10 passes is obviously an extreme version of it, but I think this is kind of the philosophy Zimmer wanted since he got hired by Minnesota. And obviously, he wants a run heavy offense that kind of includes a lot of, play action fakes and to get the large chunks of just explosive plays down the field. And all you really need for that to be effective is an efficient quarterback, and at least when the running game is actually working well. And that might be, there might not be a large difference from Kirk Cousins and a lot of other quarterbacks when you're able to do that. At least not the ones that we've seen under the Zimmer era. Like Sunday's game against Atlanta could have been won by many number of quarterbacks that have started for Zimmer in the past, whether that be Teddy or Case or Sam Bradford or all of those guys probably could have won that game against Atlanta. And that's when people will probably start asking the question, did we really need to pay him $28 million a year? And I think the answer that you're looking for actually happened almost a year ago on September 16th against Green Bay in Lambeau, which is, this coming week as well. It's the same week and things. And, Minnesota at the time from last year was thinking, well, with Keenum, they didn't really think they had the firepower to claw back into games. And like just pretty much if Zimmer's defense were to actually falter. But with Kirk, they kind of thought, well, maybe with him, he's more talented. He's got a bigger arm. He's consistently more accurate than Case Keenum. Maybe we might be able to do that. And that's why they went ahead and did it. And in that game, they fell down 20-7 entering the fourth quarter. And in the fourth quarter alone, they managed to put up 22 points in order to force overtime. Now, with Case Keenum, does that happen? Obviously, we don't necessarily know the answer to that, but I do think we can probably get to a no based on what we've seen on him since he left Minnesota. And it was on the road against a division rival, against a quarterback that I don't think anyone would argue is better than Kirk Cousins. And I think that is pretty much why they, paid him all the money, because they needed him to come into those type of situations and not only lead them back but prevail. And if it weren't for Daniel Carlson missing 2 kicks in overtime, we win that game. It's not a tie, it's a win. And I do think that kind of is a thing. And I do think Cousins being reduced to a game manager isn't necessarily bad, because I do think that's what he was brought in here. He's not here to be, Aaron Rodgers. He's not supposed to be throwing for 5,000 yards and 45 touchdowns. He's not. That's not what Zimmer brought him in here for. He brought him in here to have consistent quarterback play. I think the goal was to have a year or at least a system similar to the 2017 philosophy, which was once again centered around running the ball, play action faking, and he just wanted a more consistent, more reliable version of it. And so enter in Kirk Cousins. And I do think that style of offense actually fits Kirk a little better, as we saw last year. I think maybe in those bigger games, sometimes the pressure gets a little bit to the guy. And he's always been lauded for that play action passing, and having an actual effective running game can only help it. So I'm not thinking this is a bad thing to be doing. If anything, this is probably the right thing to actually do. It's just more of making him. It will be less pass attempts, yes, And I know some people will be like, you're paying your quarterback that much and you're paying these two receivers that are really good as much as you are, and you're giving it to the running back on the rookie deal. And I know to some that doesn't really make sense, but it's less pass attempts, but more affected attempts. Because as we saw, he once again, like 10 passes is an extreme version of this, but we did see him have a very high average yards per attempt, which is kind of similar to how Seattle has been doing things, which I think is kind of like their model of this. Because they don't really throw that much, but when they do, it's effective. Obviously, you have Russell Wilson, which is a nice thing to be having, but he did average 9.8 yards an attempt there, and that's pretty high. It's fairly high, and I do think we'll probably see a higher yards per attempt, although we will probably see less total yards and probably less touchdowns for him as we saw last year. And once again, I know 10 passes, extreme version of it, and I think is more of a byproduct of how the game kind of, the game was flowing. You kind of then went up by, I think, 21 points by like midway through the second quarter, and they were just like, all right, so we're just going to run the ball now because they can't. Atlanta kind of kept getting in their own way, and they weren't able to score really, so they were just trying to grind the clock, pretty much force Atlanta to only throw the ball. And if that's what you have to do to win, do that to win. Winning is more important than having Kirk Cousins throw for 300 yards to me. And I would expect this to actually go closer, somewhere between 20 to 25 passes a game, probably on average, if things are going well. And obviously, we will have the opposite happen, where there might be games where we just can't run the ball, and now Kirk Cousins is going to be called upon to throw the ball 40, 50 times a game. Those are probably going to happen. Things aren't always perfect. Things don't always work as they should. And I just don't think it's actually that bad to reduce Cousins to a game manager, because I think he'd be really good at it. And it's not like it hasn't won Super Bowls before. If you look at actually 2015, they had Gary Kubiak as their head coach. Denver did, and that's pretty much what they were asking Peyton Manning, Brock Osweiler to do when they were in the game. They had such a great defense. They were just saying, just don't mess it up, and we should be able to win this game. Just don't turn the ball over and kind of play safe. And I think that's kind of their whole plan. Like, it can win games. Can it work in 2019 as opposed to 2015? Things somewhat have changed, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I know some people are trying to make it out to be. I really don't feel like it is. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Until next time, I bid y'all adieu.